The eternal intoxication, humanity's oldest escape. What if the very thing you use to escape your pain is the very thing that created it? Every day, over 2 billion people around the world consume alcohol. But few stop to question the most disturbing truth. Why do we so desperately crave to feel less alive? Ancient scrolls, tribal myths, and modern statistics all point to a single unsettling reality. Humanity has been trying to numb its consciousness since the dawn of time. But what are we really running from? In some corners of Siberia, shamans drink reindeer urine to get high on psychoactive mushrooms secondhand. In pre-Columbian Mexico, elite priests ingested pulque, a fermented agave drink, during rituals designed to strip the soul of its memories. In Japan's Heian period, aristocrats drank to summon ghosts and write poetry with the dead. Alcohol is not just a beverage. It is a portal used by cultures, empires, and mystics alike to flee the unbearable weight of awareness. But why? From the icy altars of the Norse to the blood-soaked goblets of Babylon, humans have always sought altered states. In Sumer, beer was not just a drink, it was an offering to the gods, poured onto the ground as libation. The Egyptians believed wine came from the blood of Osiris, god of rebirth, consumed to die and be reborn in spirit. In ancient Greece, participants of the Eleusinian mysteries drank kykeon, a psychoactive brew, in total darkness, believing it granted them visions of the afterlife. Dionysus, god of wine, was worshipped not for pleasure, but for madness, the divine frenzy that tore through rational mind and made the soul naked. Do you see the pattern? Alcohol was never meant to be a casual drink. It was designed, intentionally or otherwise, to transport human consciousness out of the prison of the body. But here lies the paradox. In escaping our pain, we also silence our potential. We trade clarity for comfort, fire for fog, spirit for spirits. And unlike other altered states sought through fasting, chanting, or sacred plants, alcohol comes with a cost. It erodes not just the liver or the brain, but the very inner compass that guides us back to our higher self. No other substance in human history has been so universally loved, yet so spiritually corrosive. It is the most legal, most available, most celebrated poison. So what does that say about us? Are we truly addicted to alcohol ... or are we addicted to not feeling? And if the need to escape is so deeply rooted in our collective DNA, then maybe the real question is this: what trauma, what cosmic ache, what spiritual homelessness are we all trying to drown? This is not just about a drink. This is about the oldest human ritual, the ritual of forgetting. But in remembering this truth, perhaps we can reclaim our choice. So if this made you pause, even for a second, like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover what few dare to ask. What if sobriety is not abstinence ... but awakening?
2. From Al-Kuhl. 2. The invisible doors. What if every sip you took was not an act of pleasure, but a ritual of possession? Here's a fact that shuddered me. The word alcohol is derived from the Arabic term al-Kuhl, which originally referred not to a drink, but to a fine black powder used to darken the eyes. Yet, in the ancient texts of alchemy, alcohol describes something far more terrifying. A spirit eats the body. Yes. The etymological root of the world's most consumed intoxicant means the body-eating spirit. So let me ask you again. What are we really swallowing when we raise that glass? And more importantly, what ancient doors are we unknowingly opening? That question haunted me, Because once you peer into the alchemical origins of alcohol, you realize this is no ordinary substance. It is a symbol cipher, and quite possibly a curse. In the Hermetic traditions of Arabia and Egypt, Al-Kuhl was not merely cosmetic, it was a mystical essence, the soul extracted from matter. Alchemists believed that every element contained an inner spirit, and by distillation, that spirit could be released. In this process, the base substance was sacrificed, and its invisible power harvested. Sound familiar? That is exactly what alcohol is. It is not just fermented juice. It is the distilled spirit of a fruit, a grain, or a plant. The invisible flame ripped from the visible form. And that is why we still call it spirits. That blew my mind. I used to think calling it spirits was just poetic, but now I see it was literal. In Sufi lore, alcohol was seen as a metaphor for divine ecstasy, the wine of God's love. But the mystics also warned, misused, this sacred fire can become a trap for the soul. Jalal al-Din Rumi, who wrote more about wine than any modern poet ever could, used it as a symbol for both intoxication and awakening. Yet even he cautioned against drinking the physical wine. It drowns the seeker before they reach the shore of truth. This duality exists everywhere. In Egypt, wine was poured over mummies to anoint the dead with the essence of Osiris, god of resurrection. But this same wine, if consumed without ritual intent, was believed to unbind the soul prematurely, scattering it across the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. In Vedic India, the Soma, the drink of the gods, was revered as a pathway to immortality. But unlike alcohol, Soma was not fermented. It was carefully extracted from a sacred plant under strict conditions, the Vedic texts warned. What gives vision to the sage will burn the fool. Even among the Meons, the fermented corn drink was consumed only during specific lunar alignments, believed to open gateways to Xibalba, the shadow realm of ancestors. Outside those timings, the drink was feared, said to attract parasitic entities that feed on human aura. When I read that, my skin went cold, because across these civilizations that never knew one another, from Mexico to Mesopotamia, the same pattern appears. Distilled substances open portals, and those portals are not always safe. Which brings me to a question that keeps echoing in my chest. What if alcohol was never meant to be recreational at all? What if we are casually playing with an ancient technology meant for sacred initiation? I think of how we treat it today. Casually, recklessly, glorified in commercials and romanticized in movies. We laugh at hangovers like they are badges of honor. But what if they are actually spiritual bruises? What if the fragmentation we feel after drinking is not just chemical, but energetic disintegration? The philosopher Rudolf Steiner believed alcohol loosens the etheric body, the subtle sheath surrounding our physical form, making us vulnerable to non-physical influences. He was not speaking metaphorically. Neither were the shamans of the Amazon, who strictly forbade alcohol during ceremonies, saying, "It breaks the soul shell. Personally, this realization hit me hard. I have shared wine with friends, toasted champagne at weddings, sipped bourbon under stars. It felt beautiful, sacred even. But now, knowing what I know, I feel conflicted. Was I honoring the divine? Or entertaining shadows? And that is the unsettling beauty of this topic. It forces you to see alcohol not as good or bad, but as a tool of power, one that demands awareness, reverence, and boundaries. Because every culture that treated alcohol as sacred ... also restricted it. It was never for the mass, never for fun. It was for crossing thresholds, and only the initiated could return whole. So when we drink today, out of boredom, loneliness, happy, without knowing what we invoke, maybe we are not drinking alcohol. Maybe alcohol is drinking us. Let that thought settle, because this is where the real door opens. If alcohol is a spiritual distillate, if it literally contains the soul of the plant, then what happens when our soul meets it? Does it ignite, or does it dissolve? Next time you lift a glass, ask yourself, what am I really inviting into my body? What part of me is stepping aside so something else can come in? If this stirred something in you, like it did in me, then stay with us. Like, subscribe, because what is coming next goes even deeper. The energy body, the tears, and the ancient warnings. This is not just about alcohol. This is about your sovereignty and the spirits that seek to take it. Let us go further.
3. The spiritual fallout, when the soul tears open. What if your worst hangover was not in your liver, but in your aura? Science can tell you how alcohol affects your brain, but it cannot explain why some people wake up from a night of drinking feeling spiritually hollow, like something ancient was drained from them. Have you ever felt that? That strange emptiness? The sudden anxiety? The nagging guilt that feels too deep for just a bad decision? What if those were not emotional side effects, but energetic symptoms? Across cultures, across continents, there has always been a hidden thread of wisdom, a thread that modern science dares not touch. The belief that alcohol does not just affect your body, but also your energetic field, the subtle matrix of life force that surrounds every living being. I used to roll my eyes at this idea. Chakras? Auras? It all sounded too mystical, too woo-woo. But then I read what Rudolf Steiner said, the Austrian mystic, philosopher, and founder of anthroposophy. He claimed that alcohol dissolves the boundary between the physical body and the etheric body, the invisible blueprint that shapes and nourishes life itself. According to Steiner, drinking makes us energetically porous, open to things we do not see. And once I started looking, I saw it everywhere. In the traditions of the Amazon, shamans believe that alcohol opens cracks in the luminous cocoon it protects a person's soul. Through those cracks, wandering entities, what they call hungry spirits, can slip in and feed off your energy. In Tibet, lamas warn that certain lower spirits are drawn to intoxicated humans the way moths are drawn to flame. Because alcohol makes you shine, but it also makes you defenseless. In West Africa, Vodun priests perform cleansing rituals for those who have lost parts of their soul to drink. The language is symbolic. But the implication is real. Something was taken. Even in early Christianity, the Desert Fathers, mystics and ascetics who lived in the wilderness avoided wine not out of moral purity, but because they believed it clouded the connection to God and left the soul vulnerable to confusion, temptation, and worse. Here is the thing that shook me. Across these civilizations again, completely isolated from one another, there is the same pattern. Alcohol opens doors. But not all doors are meant to be opened. This is not superstition. This is observation, passed down from thousands of years of trial and error, by people who worked with spirit realms, not just neurology. I remember the first time I drank heavily in college. I blacked out. When I came to, I felt like I had been somewhere else, somewhere dark. And the days that followed were not just recovery. They felt like spiritual hangover, like my light had dimmed. I never told anyone that. It sounded crazy. But what if it is not? Modern energy healers, from Reiki masters to clairvoyants, report seeing people with torn auras after long periods of alcohol abuse. The most common locations? Around the solar plexus and the crown. That is not random. In many spiritual systems, the solar plexus chakra governs personal power and energetic boundaries. The crown chakra connects us to higher consciousness. When these centers are damaged, we feel scattered, disconnected, anxious, depressed. All symptoms that can look like addiction, but may actually be energetic collapse. And here is the kicker. In places with strong drinking cultures, you will find higher rates of spiritual disassociation. That is not a coincidence. I once asked a Peruvian shaman why he never allowed alcohol anywhere near his ceremonies. His answer was simple. Alcohol tears the field, and the wrong things come through torn places. That line haunted me, because suddenly, the emotional chaos people feel after drinking, the regret, the rage, the fear, made sense. It is not just internal. It is inherited from what was allowed in. Now, I know this all sounds intense, maybe even frightening, but there is hope. Because just as alcohol can damage the field, awareness can repair it. When we begin to see alcohol not as a harmless indulgence, but as a spiritual interaction, we reclaim our power. We become the gatekeepers again. Practices like meditation, breathwork, cold exposure, nature immersion, sound healing, they all help close the rips. They recalibrate the soul. They remind the body how to hold its light. And in that light, we can finally ask, what have I been giving away every time I drink? And what part of me is ready to come back home? This is not a message of fear. This is a summons to remember that your spirit was never meant to be a playground for wandering forces. It was meant to be a temple, so the next time you feel the pull to drink, pause. Not in shame, not in guilt, but in deep reverence. Because you are not weak for wanting to escape. You are ancient for knowing there is more. And if this truth resonates, if something inside you is whispering, yes, I have felt this too, then let us keep walking together. Like, subscribe, because what we explore next may just change how you see reality itself. The soul tears, but the soul also remembers how to mend. And this is where healing begins. 4. The illusion mask, when drunkenness is not awakening. What if the confidence you feel while drunk is not your true self coming alive ... but your soul slipping quietly into exile? They call it liquid courage. But how courageous is it to need a potion to speak your truth? Here is a strange contradiction. In our pursuit of freedom through alcohol, we often become more enslaved, not just to the substance, but to the illusion it creates. And no one warns us that the thing we drink to feel more like ourselves ... might be the very thing that erases who we really are. Have you ever asked, why do I feel more me after a few drinks ... and yet wake up feeling like a stranger to myself? That is the paradox. and it is one I have lived. Alcohol seduces us by offering what every human craves: relief. Relief from anxiety, from inhibition, from the weight of the self. But here is the catch. It is a false relief, a borrowed mask. In the light of neuroscience, we know alcohol reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, introspection, and moral judgment. But ancient spiritual traditions saw something more than neurons firing. They saw a mask being placed, a glamour, a distortion field. In Greek tragedy, actors wore masks called persona, the root word of our modern personality. The mask was not the character. It was what concealed the character. And that is exactly what alcohol does. It gives you a new persona, louder, freer, more seductive, while quietly burying your essence. The Hindus call this illusion Maya, the veil that makes the unreal seem real. And alcohol, in many ways, is the ultimate Maya. It does not show you truth. It shows you a curated hallucination of who you think you are when you are finally uninhibited. But freedom without self-awareness is not liberation. It is drift. In Buddhist psychology, the intoxicated state is classified as a form of moha, delusion, a confused fog where suffering is temporarily paused, not healed. That pause feels good, but it comes at the cost of clarity. And here is something I never learned in school. In Tibetan Tantra, advanced meditators avoid alcohol not because it is impure, but because it mimics the early stages of samadhi, the blissful oneness of mind. It creates a false awakening, a chemical enlightenment, one that never arrives. I find that terrifying and fascinating because I remember the parties, the rush of laughter, the sudden boldness, the sense that I had arrived into some hidden version of myself. But it always faded, and what was left felt cheap, artificial, like plastic jewelry that had once glimmered like gold. Across civilizations, alcohol has been used not just to celebrate, but to alter perception. In Norse mythology, the mead of poetry granted gods and mortals divine inspiration, but those unworthy would descend into madness. In China, Taoist monks brewed herbal wines that were said to dissolve the ego, but only if consumed under moonlit prayer. The difference? Intent and containment. Modern drinking is often devoid of sacredness. We do not sip with reverence. We gulp to forget. And when forgetting becomes habit, we do not just forget our pain. We begin to forget ourselves. There is a psychological term for this: ego inflation. When a person becomes fused with a larger-than-life version of themselves, it is not real confidence. It is compensatory. Alcohol enhances this state, giving us a temporary sense of power while weakening our true center. The crown chakra, which governs spiritual connection, often dims after drinking, according to both clairvoyants and Eastern mystics. The solar plexus, our seat of self-worth, becomes chaotic. No wonder so many of us drink to feel more alive and wake up feeling spiritually bankrupt. I have felt that spiritual hangover, the kind no aspirin can touch. And here is the hardest truth I have had to face. I was not using alcohol to become more of myself. I was using it to become someone else, someone more likable, more fearless, more fun. But if your authenticity only arrives in a bottle, then who are you really? That question cracked something open in me. Because the answer is not shame, it is compassion. We drink not because we are bad, but because we are disconnected from the body, from silence, from the soul that speaks in whispers, not shouts. Alcohol turns up the volume, but often it drowns out the signal. So what do? We begin gently to sit in our own skin, to breathe through the discomfort, to ask, what am I afraid of meeting in my sober self? And here is the miracle. When you meet it, the awkwardness, the doubt, the tremble, you find something incredible underneath. You, unmasked, undrugged, undiluted. So the next time that drink is offered, do not just say yes or no. Say, who do I become when I drink? And who am I without it? If that question lit a fire in you, even a flicker, then you are already waking up. Like, subscribe, stay with us. Because we are pulling back the curtain. And what lies beyond ... is your real face. The one no mask can imitate. V. The warnings of the masters, messages across time. If the greatest spiritual teachers in history warned against alcohol ... why do we still toast in their names? It is a disturbing thought. Around the world, sacred holidays are marked with drinks. We raise glasses to Jesus at Christmas, pour wine at Buddhist weddings, and sip whiskey at funerals, often unaware that the very founders of those traditions spoke against intoxication. What if our celebrations are unknowingly laced with the very force that severs us from the sacred? What if the thing we use to feel closer to spirit is the exact thing that pushes spirit away? The dissonance is real. I feel it. Because I, too, was raised in a culture that linked alcohol with communion, social, emotional, even divine. But the deeper I dove into spiritual history, the louder the warnings became. Let us begin in the East. The Bhagavad Gita, one of India's holiest texts, teaches that there are 3 gunas, or qualities in nature: sattva, purity; rajas, passion; and tamas, darkness. Alcohol increases rajas and tamas, leading to restlessness, confusion, and spiritual ignorance. It is not just a health hazard, it is a vibrational downgrade. In Ayurveda, the ancient Indian science of life, alcohol is classified as a poison to the mind, capable of disrupting the subtle channels through which prana, or life force, flows. That alone reshaped how I thought about just a glass of wine. In Buddhism, the 5th precept is clear. I undertake the training to abstain from intoxicating drinks and drugs that lead to carelessness. The Buddha knew intoxication clouds the mind, making it harder to see reality as it is. And for a tradition that seeks freedom through mindfulness, anything that dulls awareness is a trap. Now shift westward. In Christianity, the role of alcohol is complicated. Jesus is said to have turned water into wine. But early Christian mystics, from St. Augustine to St. Francis of Assisi, warned fiercely against excess, not just as a moral failing, but as a spiritual fragmentation. St. Augustine wrote that drunkenness was not a sin of pleasure, but one of self-annihilation. To him, losing the self in alcohol meant turning away from the divine image we carry within. And then there is Islam, where the warning is most unambiguous. The Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah and Al-Ma'idah, states that intoxicants are an abomination of Satan's handiwork and should be avoided so that believers may succeed. The Prophet Muhammad called alcohol the mother of all evils. But here is what most people miss. Despite this clear rejection, Islamic alchemists were the ones who advanced the science of distillation, not to drink, but to extract essences from medicine and perfume. It was Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber, who developed early distillation techniques. He called alcohol Al-Kuhl, not as a beverage, but as a volatile spirit capable of transforming or destroying. This duality is key. Every tradition seems to say, intoxication is a tool, but it is not safe. In Hermetic philosophy, recorded in texts like the Kabbalion and the Corpus Hermeticum, the principle of vibration reigns supreme. Everything vibrates, and our state of consciousness determines what level of reality we access. Alcohol lowers that vibration. It disconnects us from the all, from the divine pattern woven into the universe. When I read that, something inside me snapped into place, because I had felt it, the energetic dimming, the emotional volatility, the way drinking slowly made the sacred feel less reachable. And the teachings did not stop. In Sufism, the mystical path of Islam, the poet Rumi often spoke of wine, but always as a metaphor for divine love. The real intoxication was not in a bottle. It was in the overwhelming presence of the beloved, of God. But even Rumi warned, literal wine leads away from clarity. You can be drunk on love, or drunk on wine. One brings you closer. The other makes you forget. I found it heartbreaking and deeply honest, because I know the comfort alcohol can bring. I know the illusion of connection, but I also know how it can slowly dissolve the thread between who we are and who we are becoming. So why do we ignore these warnings? Maybe because they ask something hard of us to feel, to be raw, to face the vast, unfiltered beauty and terror of our own awareness. And alcohol, it blurs that sharp edge. It makes the unbearable bearable, but only for a moment. And that moment comes with a cost, not just in health or memory or behavior, but in spiritual alignment, in the loss of subtle guidance, in the silencing of that small inner voice that once whispered, "This is not your path." That is why the masters warned us, not out of dogma, not out of control, but out of love. Because they knew, when the mind is clear and the soul is steady, what we call escape becomes unnecessary. We realize that every wound we were running from was also our gateway to awakening. So maybe the greatest rebellion is not in drinking less. Maybe it is in listening more, to the silence, to the ache, to the masters whose voices still echo, in scripture, in poems, in the chambers of your heart. If this message stirred you even a little, then you are hearing it too. Like, subscribe. Let us walk this path of clarity together. Because the sacred has never required intoxication, only presence. And that is already inside you. Rebirth from the shadows, the sacred return. What if every moment you tried to forget your pain was actually a cry from your soul to be remembered? In a world that glorifies distraction, have we mistaken numbness for peace? Why do we medicate our loneliness instead of listening to it? And if alcohol was never meant to free us, but to test us, what happens when we finally say, "No more forgetting, ... I am ready to remember"? These questions hit different when you have walked through the fog. I have, and what I discovered, through ancient texts, through silence, through my own breaking, is this: the darkness was never our enemy. It was our cocoon. In Egypt, the god Osiris was not reborn through celebration, but through death, dismemberment, and reassembly. In Mayan cosmology, Xibalba, the underworld, was not punishment. It was initiation. Even Jesus, in Christian mysticism, descended into hell before ascending into light. Across all cultures, the same truth echoes. Rebirth requires descent, but the descent is not the end. So if alcohol has become your cave, your way of dropping out, hiding, softening the unbearable edges, then maybe this moment is not your failure. Maybe it is your threshold. Because here is what the ancient mystery schools taught. Every wound is a doorway. Every collapse is a sacred invitation to remake yourself, not as the mask, not as the addict, not as the escape artist, but as the one who remembers how to hold their light. It starts small, a breath, a question, a night without the drink, just to feel what is underneath. It grows slowly, through practices like meditation, nature immersion, sound healing, or conscious community. Not because those things fix you, but because they help you hear yourself again. The Hopi elders say, "The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves." This is not just about sobriety. It is about sovereignty. You are not broken. You are becoming. And if you feel that whisper rising inside, that strange knowing that the drink is not serving you anymore, listen to it. That is your soul stirring. That is your spring thaw. So I ask you this: if you knew you could reclaim your fire, would you be willing to walk through the ashes? If this message landed, even just a ripple, then do not keep it to yourself. Drop a comment. Tell your story. You are not alone. Like this video. Subscribe if this path calls you, because in the next episode, we go deeper into the forbidden realm of addiction and astral parasites. Yes, it gets that wild. The journey is sacred, and the sacred is waiting for your return. Let us rise together.